As tensions rise between India and China over the border dispute at Galawan, there are talks about reducing India's dependency on China for its key trade issues. One of the important trade factors between India and China is about the import and export of pharmaceutical goods. Indian drug companies are heavily dependent on China for the key starting materials and active pharmaceutical ingredients. It's called API. API basically are the starting materials required to make a drug. Though India are world leaders when it comes to exporting finished pharmaceutical products, the key materials required to make those products still comes from China. We almost import 60% of our pharmaceutical products from China, and those includes for various drugs such as paracetamol, certain anti-infectives, and also certain BP medication. So across the board, India is dependent on China for the key pharma ingredients. India is considered as the pharmacy of the world, and it is true to a large extent. We export almost 80% of the finished pharma goods across the world. US, which is one of the biggest buyer of Indian finished products, imports 40% of their medicines from India. So India, in that sense, has made its mark in the pharmaceutical space. However, Indian manufacturers still have to depend heavily with China for their important APIs. Now, even during the 2017 Doklam crisis, Indian manufacturers were told that they were going to reduce their dependency on China for importing goods from there. However, from 2017 to 2020, we have figures officially published by the Ministry of Commerce that shows that India's import dependency on China from 2017, that is the Doklam crisis, to now has actually gone up by over 28%. So there is one side we have the rhetoric about reducing the dependency on China, and on the other side we have the ground realities where the trade with China makes it not just economic sense but also an imperative to build an entire pharma industry on. The Indian drug manufacturer, that is the formulation makers, they do agree that we have a high dependency on China and there needs to be some resolution to do it. We also have Indian API manufacturers, but the competitive edge that China has over the Indian companies is something that can only be filled through policy issues. We had spoken last week to Sudarshan Jain, who's heading the Indian Pharmaceutical Alliance, which is a lobby group of large Indian pharma companies, on what would it take for India to reduce its dependency on China.
The government of India is in the process of announcing the final guidelines for API policy and setting up bulk drug clusters. It is a very welcome move. It will give impetus to the API industry. This announcement is like, say, for fermentation plant, 20% benefit will be given, and for other chemicals, it will be 10% production linked incentive scheme. And the second step which government is doing is setting up bulk drug plant, which will ensure the faster clearance, environmental clearance, utilities, and also will set up R&D center for continuous improvement. And I'm sure this will help to build healthcare security for the country. This cannot be done tomorrow. This is certain. It will take 2 to 3 years time where we start seeing some results. We are working towards a challenge where China has moved considerably forward, and we have to catch up. And that's why single point clearance, faster clearance for the proposals, environmental clearance, land clearance, everything will become important. But this is such a high priority for our country, and we need to move forward with the speed. And if we do that, still it will take 2 to 3 years time.
Now that this bulk drug policy is on its way, it should be placed in Parliament in July, or that is next month. What does this policy say? We'll just read out few pointers on the policy. The draft guideline has been shared on this policy. This basically says that it gives incentives to drug manufacturers, and specifically the active pharmaceutical ingredient manufacturers who are setting up manufacturing plants in India to produce 58 key drug ingredients that India currently is heavily dependent on imports, especially from China. This is something that needs to roll out. The concessions includes is that if you are if you are manufacturing certain kind of pharma ingredients, you will get certain tax incentives, you will have faster approval when it comes to environmental clearances, and so on and so forth. This is a start. It will take at least 3 years for this policy to actually get into an action. That is, when we actually see a manufacturing plant come up. And even then, we are not sure if the dependency on China will completely go down, because there are economic pressures that dictate why we buy goods from China. For example, in China, the cost of buying an API from a Chinese company is almost 25 to 30% cheaper than buying it from any other source. This is a big, big factor. Chinese companies who manufacture these APIs in their home countries, they get several SOPs and benefits. Some of them includes cheaper power, cheaper interest rates with banks and financial institutions, and also easier environmental clearances. These are the three key factors that ensures that Chinese API manufacturers maintain the competitive edge towards the manufacturers of rest of the world. We have to work towards putting up this policy and rolling it out. This is what pharma companies tell us, that we've had this discussion several times over the past years. In fact, every time when there is a dispute with China, this issue comes up on reducing the dependency. It becomes a talk, and then everybody goes back to their normal lives and nothing happens. Right now, what we need is this policy to roll out and actually support the industry who've been asking for SOPs so that they can get their plan rolling. So till that happens, we have to perhaps understand this trade reality that Indian pharma companies have with China.